Why don't I sort of how did we end up where we are now and where are we headed? And I think you're all familiar with the fact that the county commissioners and the delegation appointed this task force a year ago last August to look into the issues and come up and with a recommendation. And when we took this on as an independent task force, basically there were two essential principles that we felt had to be established at the beginning. One was that we were going to make a recommendation and not just have another report that had gathered dust on their shelves. And secondly, that the goal, however it came out, was to preserve the mission, the essential mission that the county was providing of making available long-term care for folks that couldn't afford it, and which they've been doing for 200 years. Given that, it was really kind of an open field, and we thought we ought to take a look at everything that was there. And essentially, I think there were sort of like five general issue areas that had to be dealt with to come to a sensible proposal for the future of Maplewood. One was the threshold question whether the county should stay in the business. And I don't want to spend a lot of time on that, but it's an issue that's been all over the country, and counties all over the place have faced that, particularly in the face of reduced funding from the federal government and facility aging and all that kind of thing. The second, we really spent a lot of time on that, about 4 months. And as you know, we came to the conclusion and voted unanimously in favor of the county should continue it. And I want to add that since then, I mean, we continue to discuss it all around, and I talk to a gazillion people about this all the time, and there really has been very little pushback on that. There's no significant, there's one or two people, and there's one guy that I talk to all the time that says, well, the government shouldn't be doing anything. But that issue was the threshold question. The second was, what kind of a system made sense going forward? They had thought about either fixing up the old building or building a new one. I mean, that's as far as it had gone. And that meant, sort of replicating the kind of facility that they had. And we thought we ought to take a look around and see if there were other things that were possible. And that's when the greenhouse concept came to our attention. And we'll talk about that more. So we thought that really was worth exploring in great detail, and we ended up, as you know, recommending that that's where it ought to go, and we're absolutely convinced of that, and thinks, frankly, that this is a wonderful opportunity for the state, if we can get one. I talked to Commissioner Tumpus very early on about this, and he said he's been wanting to see one in New Hampshire for years, and nobody was ever willing to take it on. And he said, if there's one, I think I may have told you this, boy. He said that if there's one place you can get it done, it's in Monadnock.
Why it hasn't gone on anymore?
Pardon me?
You know why anybody else hasn't been willing to take it on?
I don't know. Reluctance or inertia. God, I really can't. I really can't say. There's 150 of these around, more than 150 around the country. I mean, they aren't. They're new in a way, but there's 10 years of experience with this now. There are several in Massachusetts. But nobody was ever seemingly willing to do it in New Hampshire, so Monadnock would try to lead the way again. Pardon me.
Going to have a roundabout in front of it too.
Maybe we ought to build that in here. Maybe that'd be sort of a stalking horse. We'll propose that and let people worry about that, and we'll get everything else done. Then we can take it off the table. Yeah, so anyhow, the greenhouse just seemed like a great opportunity, and we went and visited several of them, and we've been working with those folks ever since. So we had a concept, and the next question was, okay, is it feasible in the area? Financially, could that be done? We spent 5 months on a financial feasibility analysis, and the bottom line of that has actually been published, that the operating cost is basically the same as the operating cost currently at Maplewood. It's actually a little less for the first year, but it was comparable. That was an essential. And the second was, okay, what it'll cost to build it if you're going to build it. Well, it was at that point that you can imagine the next thing I had to do was go see Jack Dugan, because we had to start thinking about, okay, what would be a site and could we get it within a tax increment zone, new market tax credit zone. And cutting to the bottom line of that, yes, we planned on that for within a new market tax credit zone in Keene, and they did the analysis in the context of that, the whole financial feasibility analysis, and we ended up, to put it grossly simply, that for a construction cost that was about the estimate about $28 million for 15 10-person greenhouses. The cost, all-in cost, and that includes fixtures and actually even $800,000 of staff training and everything in that for about $28 million would be the cost of the taxpayers, or the county eventually would be 18. So for $18 million, you could get a state-of-the-art operation that represented the best thinking for long-term care, and compare that to the estimated cost of just doing either a Band-Aid on Maplewood for 16, or 2 Band-Aids on Maplewood for 22 or something. So we thought, okay, the numbers work. So the next thing was, okay, how about a location? Is there a suitable location? And conceptually, we felt, well, if we're going to do this financially, we wanted in the new market tax credit zone. And there had been a lot of rumors about what we were looking at and where we were looking and everything else. And as you know, the development of the project gets done through a for-profit corporation, the way the financing works. And the corporation then builds it, they acquire the property, build it, and lease it to the county. That's the way it works. And they did this with the courthouse. Similar, same kind of thing. It's complicated, but it's the same thing that they went through with the courthouse. And so we started scouting around for the property. We came up with a location, and I can tell you now, because it's out of the closet, we signed. I say we, you have to be careful with the we. It's a subsidiary of MEDC. Has signed an option to buy the property, so I can tell you where it is. It's 85 acres adjacent to the jail. So if you go out on 101, I can show you on the aerial photograph here, but it's the 85 acres. This side of the jail is within the new market tax credit zone, and we have an option for 6 months to purchase that. So this is the property that we thought was ideal. It's got city sewer, it's got city water. Actually, they put the water and sewer in when they built the jail. The previous owner was the same owner that sold the jail to the property of the city. So anyhow, that's now in place at least for 6 months to see if we can, within that period of time, develop a specific program that we can present to the county commissioners and the delegation, say, here is what we think really makes sense. Should we go ahead? Can you approve it? So fourth pillar there, the fourth area was the location. The fifth, and this is the way, I'm going to shut up in a minute here, but I'll just finish. The fifth, the elephant in the room, really from the start, has been, okay, what are you going to do about Maple? What are you going to do about the facility, the building out in Westmoreland, if you go ahead and do this? That hadn't been decided or focused on or debated a lot, but it seemed that it ought to be examined, and the options ought to be developed if there were things that could be done that made sense. And there is one that we are now talking very seriously about, and that is converting Maplewood as it exists out there to a regional veterans long-term care and rehabilitation center for this region. I can tell you it's no state secret at all how this happened to come up. I was talking to Annie Custer just before the election, and she was up at the house. We were doing a fundraiser for Annie. And I'd known Annie for years, but I didn't know she was on the Veterans Affairs Committee. So, you know, she's doing her stump speech, and she said she was on the Veterans Affairs Committee. Wait a minute, how about the veterans? So I talked to her right afterwards. I said, well, she knew about, you know, what we were trying to do with the Maplewood thing. I said, what do you think about that? She said, I think that's great. And she said, we've really got to pursue that. And she said, you know, let's get together right after the election. And I figured, well, even if she didn't get elected, she knew who all the players were. So anyhow, she called me, you know, on the way down to Washington after the election. She said, we got to get going on this. So she sent her staff people over to talk with us about that. They were very excited about it. I had mentioned it also to Senator Shaheen when I saw her, again, shortly before the election, talked to her about it. And I thought we ought to begin to sound out the veterans groups. So I met with the guys, the two guys that are the coordinators of support services for veterans' families at SCS. And they're crazy about that. I think there's a tremendous need for that. And so we had the meeting. We were trying to, the next idea that would be to try to get, and I was trying to do it before the end of the year, to get Senator Shaheen and Annie Custer to meet with us out at Maplewood and look at it and just start seeing where that goes, and to talk to the director up at White River. And you know, I don't know where, you know, whether that will materialize, but it seems like, one, it's conceptually, I think it's a very good idea. Two, I'm told by people who know, and certainly I don't, that it's something that really would fill a definite need, that there's tremendous, the closest, the only thing there is in New Hampshire is up in Tilton. There's a soldier's home up there, has I think 150 beds. So I mean, for the number of veterans, you know, that 150 beds for long-term care doesn't amount to much. So anyhow, at least to me, that sort of took that issue off the table. Yes, there is something that could be looked into, and possibly, you know, be a very sensible conversion use for that property. So those are kind of the 5 things we've been struggling with. You know, we submitted a report. I know Alyssa's got a copy of that. You guys probably do too. Recommended trying to proceed to develop the greenhouse idea. The delegation didn't want to decide anything without having more studies, so they then decided to have these 4 town meetings, which they had, and they didn't want to really elaborate on what the options were or really that much about the greenhouse. So I thought, okay, some of us that were on the task force felt so strongly about this, and we're so convinced that this is a great opportunity for this community that we had to, you know, continue to try to get the word out. So we have formed this group called the Beyond Maplewood Coalition, and we're out there stumping and trying to get the word out about what a great opportunity this is. I think you know that, or Alyssa knows that we've got our own website now, and we're on Facebook and Twitter, and this is the mission statement. Here's the people that are working on it, and we're just trying to get the word out. And and you know, we're going around talking to various groups. Yesterday, was it, when were we at the?
We were at the senior center the other day.
Yeah, I was at the senior center. We're doing the Jaffrey Rotary tomorrow. I've done the Keene Rotary, the Elm City. We're talking to all the various groups, and just trying to get the word out about what the greenhouse is. And so we're having our forum next Tuesday. And I think at that point, maybe I ought to shut up for a minute.
John, what are some of the, cost aside, We know that that's an obstacle in some people's minds, but in all the conversations you're having when you talk to these people out and about in the community, at the forums, what are some of the other meaningful obstacles or points of concern for people who have questions?
I mean, this is the thing we really wanted to find out is, you know, what were people concerned about? And I would say the most general concern that we've heard is the greenhouse system, this you know, small resident, is that suitable for the population we're serving and will continue to serve? That's been generally a question that we've got. People hear about the greenhouse and they think it's too good, or it's too good, and you know, it'd be too upscale. Or that's the concern we've had.
So what do you say to them? What
we say is there is immense experience around the country that they serve similar populations in the greenhouse. And at our forum on Tuesday, I've got the national director of the greenhouse program coming up here from Washington, and she's going to address that at that session. She has, and has been working and preparing for that, the resident profile of the current residents at Maplewood, showing the level of impairment, both physical and mental, or memory, et cetera, to see how well that gets covered in the experience. We went to visit the two places we went to, greenhouse facilities in Massachusetts. One of them, and Linda can talk about this for a minute too, one of them, there was one wing of this place, it was in Chelsea, was all ALS, and I say advanced ALS. And our host, the guy who guided us while we were there, in this very home-like setting, was a guy who could move his one eyebrow. And he's got this sort of, you know, computer thing, like Ellen Corindia. You guys know Ellen Corindia and the way she operates. And she knows this guy. I found out later, because Ellen's a good friend of mine. She knows this guy. He operates the elevator, he scoots around, you know, in that chair. He can, you know, do the shades in his bathroom, all this kind of stuff. These people were severely impaired, but they're in a greenhouse and being cared for in a greenhouse. And just to give you an illustration of the personal aspect of that program, which is focused on enhancing the individual integrity of the residents so that they aren't treated like handicapped patients, that they have a lot of say in what they do. These folks, and I'm talking about the ALS group, and they operate as a little family there. They decide in their own entertainment. And what they decided one day was they want to go skydiving. So this guy, they arranged a skydiving trip to some place in Massachusetts. I've got a video of this showing them, those guys, they went out, guys and women, they were a mixed group. They went skydiving, and you know, guy's got this helmet on, helmet camera. You show them going out of the plane. These people who can't, you know, some can't do anything but move anything, and just think for a minute what that means psychologically to those folks. The other place that we visited, a greenhouse, was in Westwood, Massachusetts, and the facility we visited there, the house that we went to, was all advanced dementia. They were all Alzheimer's. And you know, honestly, you wouldn't know it walking in there. You know, people are sitting around the living room. You know, the way this is, it's a living room and a fireplace, and then individual private bedrooms scattered around. And in that case, there were 12 residents to the house. Normally it's 10. We're proposing 10. They were all advanced, you know, Alzheimer's. Some of the folks that you know, you've seen in these videos that the greenhouse people have. I think if you've seen that video clip that we've shown, people haven't noticed, but for those who have seen the video, there's a guy that's scooting around in a wheelchair, and he's out. Then he goes out and he's hoeing in a garden. Nobody notices the fact that he's got no legs. I mean, this is not a guy that's, you know, running marathons, but he's operating, being cared for well. So I think that there's a body of experience that demonstrates that the folks that we are caring for and want to continue to, forgive the, I keep saying we, I got to be careful of pronouns. They are, let me emphasize something. Our group has no official capacity whatever. We're just a bunch of volunteers. We have no decision-making power or anything. People know what we're doing, but we're not deciding anything. We're just trying to come up with a sound basis for recommendations and doing the work that's necessary so people that do have the responsibility can make an informed, responsible judgment, and we hope decide in favor of doing something that really would be great for the community.
Just a quick question on some of the numbers here. If I did the math quickly, you got 150 that you're anticipating being able to serve through this facility.
Yeah.
What are the current numbers at Maplewood, and what kind of projections are you showing given the aging of the population and the not so rapid increase in incomes around here, so that might create a greater need for the county down the road? I wonder what your assumptions might be on that.
I'll answer the second part first, and then Linda will answer the first part, because I can't remember the first part anyhow. But the second, answer them both. Answer them both. Answer them both. I've said enough. Linda, you're on. I've talked enough.
Well, part of what we continue to do is to educate ourselves, and so whether, like today, I emailed to John an article that was in Wall Street Journal addressing aging and the demographics, and some studies that are being done. And one of the things that we have discussed and that we're aware of is that the demographics in New Hampshire are getting more gray every year. And so what are going to be the implications of that? How many people are going to choose to move to Florida or to Arizona? How many of the people who have done that get there and say, I miss New England, and then they come back? I mean, it's a changing landscape right now.
Sure.
And so in terms of, percentages, numbers, at least in my opinion, that is something that we can guess, but we really don't know, because we don't have control over people's lives. Is that going to have an implication on our numbers? Probably yes. I mean, if we continue to have people come to the state, which does not have any personal income tax, which is very desirable for people who are affluent, obviously, they're probably not going to have implications, but perhaps the people who have lived here all their lives, as their resources dwindle. And right now at Maplewood, we have people who saved and were prudent, but they've outlived their income, which is why they're at Maplewood. And as we live longer, part of what we're seeing too is the admission age at Maplewood gets older every year. People are not coming into nursing in their 70s typically, unless there's a specific diagnosis. But they're all older. And so you look at that and you say, well, if they're going to go in and they're 88, they're probably going to be dead in a year. Well, that's not true. I mean, they end up living very long lives. I mean, you can see just from, your coverage, we have a lot of people who are in their 90s and a lot of people who are 100 or have lived to be 100 or over at Maplewood. So it's fluid. It's absolutely fluid.
And so with the 150 compared to your current numbers at Maplewood, what's the...
142.
Yeah, and part of the reason that we don't have full capacity, Tom, is because we have shared rooms. Mm-hmm. So I have a room, my roommate passes, you need a bed, but you're not going to go in my room. And so that's part of the problem that the administrator has. She may have people who want to be there, but because we have shared rooms, we have to have, that sex compatibility. And so that lots of times will keep the numbers down. The other thing that we're aware of too is that the current administrator really has always had a safety net within her population, because she never wants to be in a position where when the hospital calls and somebody needs to be placed, that she's got a bed for them. And Catherine's done a great job that way. She really has. It's been wonderful.
But so with this new proposal, then you'd roughly be at about the same level you're at now?
Well, and that's dictated, if I'm correct, by the state. The state has allocated that number of beds for Maplewood. Mm. Will that change? that's going to be a government decision. It isn't anything that we end up being able to do. And it's, again, all tied in with the money, you know.
Here's another point on the demographics. Actually, it's one of the things, going back to the task force, one of the first things that we took a look at. So I had Steve Norton come over from New Hampshire Senate. You all know Steve Norton. And he did his projection, you know, and you've all seen the report, the silver tsunami and all that. And those projections actually were another factor that sort of influenced our interest in the greenhouse, because if you have a bunch of these, well, let me sort of do the contrast. If you maintain a large institutional facility, it's kind of stuck there. The population changes dramatically. For example, there's going to be a sort of flood of baby boomers, but they're eventually going to disappear too, and then there'll be fewer people. You have much more flexibility with dealing with changes in demographics and population with a bunch of houses like that than a single sort of large institutional facility. And one of the great, I think one of the biggest advantages in several aspects of the greenhouse thing is the flexibility, both in how you structure or how you allocate the houses among different levels of care that's needed and that sort of thing, than having a single large facility.
In terms of staffing, obviously you mentioned the operational costs would be roughly equivalent under the greenhouse system. You're serving roughly the same population in terms of numbers, but how would staffing change, increase, decrease, have to be reconfigured to that system from what Maplewood currently has?
They would be reconfigured largely. It is a different system of support, so that instead of having a couple of nurses centered on a hall, and then you got a big staff of the kitchen and laundry and all these other support services, each of the houses has so many LNAs assigned to it. They have a funny name called Shabazim. I hate these names, but they're trained to do. They're not the RNs. They're RN. The registered nurses serve the facility too, but there are people there all the time in the house that have multiple responsibilities of both looking after them, helping with the meals, and doing everything. That takes a substantial amount of retraining, and that'd be offered to everybody who wants to come over. And in the budget that was developed, there's actually a figure in there of $800,000 to cover retraining of staff. So the staffing numbers change in terms of you have less support staff and more direct care staff, but they tend to balance out so that at the end the numbers come out about the same. Do you want to add anything to that, Linda?
Well, only the clinical outcomes that we read about with people in the greenhouses is that instead of my having, during the course of a month or a week, huge numbers of people passing through, doing my laundry, helping me with bathing, the numbers get smaller, and so the relationships become better. I, as your caretaker, see you and know you, rather than you're one of, and as we have now in many traditional nursing homes, I might be with you one day a week, but that's it, and then I won't see you maybe for 14 days. But if I'm with you 5 days a week, taking care of you, working with you, I know you. So if you stop eating, or you start complaining about a pain, I'm watching you, I'm learning, and then I would go to an RN and say, Mr. Smith is not eating, I'm concerned about him, and then you can have earlier clinical interventions, which are really, really good. But if I'm not doing that on a routine basis, then it can be missed, or there can be an oversight. And the other piece that's so wonderful about these homes that we've visited is I have my own private bathroom. My mom had to go into nursing this year, and she's been living in assisted living at Maplewood and loves it. But she had to go into nursing, and she went from having her own private bathroom, her own private room, to having to share a bathroom with 3 other people, 2 of whom had dementia. So it's not satisfactory. She didn't sleep well because there were people up, wandering, again, dementia. And, you know, this is the opportunity we have, is with that flexibility of having 10 different houses. We could have a house which is specifically geared for higher functioning people who might be there for rehab. And again, that's another thing that we found in our meetings with people. People have said, well, where's the rehab room? Where are you going to do physical therapy? And you do it in the home, just like home health care does physical therapy in the home. So it's a huge cultural change that we're looking at. It's not a hospital model, it's a home model, which I think is in sympathy with how we are developing wonderful services with home health care in this community. It's the same process we went through when we closed down the wonderful institutions we had for people who had different kinds of disabilities, and we brought them home again and we put them in our neighborhood. So what this really is a radical look and change from how we've treated the elderly and how we view aging. We shouldn't be putting people out to pasture. We should be putting them into a situation where they're continuing to learn, where they're continuing to be happy and have good care. And that means, like, when I see one of the women at Maplewood who has MS, her body's falling apart, but she is so bright and she is so bored. And by having a smaller population, the caretakers can become more engaged with these people and have better outcomes. And that's what we're seeing, you know, as we look at this whole conceptual and delivery system. It's really wonderful. It's very exciting.
Bob, do you want to add something on the professional medical side of the staffing?
From the medical perspective, I apologize for my cough, but I'm actually feeling much better than I said. Anyway, having been a physician at Dartmouth Hitchcock Keene for 35 years, I have dealt with hundreds, really thousands of elderly patients. For 25 years, I was making nursing home rounds to the traditional facilities here in Keene. And I similarly had the opportunity to be visiting some of the patients at Woodward Home and Prospect Place, which are 100-year-old buildings, but they are set up more like what the greenhouse facilities will be. Those are individuals who are not placed in long institutional corridors, but have nice rooms, often private baths, but sometimes they're sharing bathrooms. They have activities. They have a small staff which is looking after them. They are able to do what they can do what they're able to do. They can help out in the kitchen when they're able, and the same thing will be the case here. For the greenhouse also, it has been demonstrated there are fewer hospitalizations for whatever reason, and the rate of decline, of age-related decline, really decreases with the increased activities, and as Linda stated, with the same nurses or with the same staff looking at the people on a daily basis. They are very good at picking up subtle changes, which someone seeing the patient once or twice per week probably would miss. That's very important. Similarly, satisfaction amongst the families of these residents is much higher, and the staff burnout is much lower because they are doing pretty much everything rather than just bathing incontinent people all the time. So it really works well.
They had one thing, one of the things we learned was, and they've got national data on this, is the reduction of need for medication. There's a number of pills, or however they measure this thing, but they have less need for, what would be?
Primarily psychotropic drugs for people who are going through dementia, and because some of the behaviors with dementia are hitting, punching. There was an article recently about that and what typically goes on in nursing homes. And so my experience, because I worked in nursing homes and long-term care for 17 years, is that I was traveling for 2 different companies, and I would go in and I knew immediately when I was in a facility where what they were doing was snowing the residents by giving them psychotropic drugs so they could manage them better. We can't physically tie them to a chair anymore, but we can make them more passive and more compliant by giving them drugs. And part of what has been one of the focuses with the greenhouse is to, as John said, decrease potentially and or eliminate some of these drugs so people are more independent and their integrity and their personhood, remains for longer periods of time. So it just hasn't, as a chef, I have to say this is just a wonderful, wonderful program, because I recently did some training at Maplewood in the kitchen in hopes that I could help make some changes in terms of the food. And it's next to impossible to do some of the things, because what they have is a huge commissary kitchen, which they cook for food for the residents and for the staff. It then has to be shipped in these containers to the residents, and up the elevator, and by the time people get the food, if they're lucky, it's warm, and if they're lucky, the broccoli still has some green color, but the time frame is huge. And in the homes that we visited, the kitchen is the center of the home. It's an open concept kitchen. The counters are at a level, so if I'm in a wheelchair, I can wheel right up and I can help with cooking if I want to. And then next to it is a big open dining room. So they get the aromatherapy of being able to smell the food. They aren't told breakfast is at 8 o'clock and that's when you have to be there. When they get up, if it's 5 o'clock and they want their breakfast, they fix it for them. And so it's really personalized. You're not being told, here's the schedule. You're creating your own schedule. And with that, they're finding that people eat better. And they're more socially connected. And it also is an opportunity for them to have personal space for their family and friends to come visit. When my mom was at Maplewood in nursing, there was another woman there. The rooms are small. I could not have a private conversation with my mother, with a roommate there. I brought my son and his wife and their 2 kids in. The place was a zoo because it's so little. But at these homes, we saw, families visiting. There's plenty of space. The living room's huge. There's a nice fireplace. It's beautiful. And, as Bob said, families, the feedback that these homes get from families is just over the top. They just can't say enough good things about the care that they're seeing.
I wonder if I could ask, as appealing as the greenhouse option seems compared to the more conventional approach, but in the minds of many, for better or for worse, it comes down to money, right? So in your modeling scenarios, did you compare how it looks to do a new greenhouse approach or green approach compared to just sort of the conventional institutional kind of structure new? Is that just outrageously expensive now?
Yeah, Tom, when I got brought into this, the commissioners and the staff had been fussing around with this for about looking at it for 5 years. They had estimates on reproducing essentially the existing facility out there, and the estimate was $60 million. Alternatively, they had an estimate to do it in Keene, and it was about the same. It was $62 million. Now, whether I can't judge those figures, but that's what they had. They got them for wherever they got them, and we compare that to the cost we're talking about for what we're trying to propose here would be 18.
Yeah, I kept sticking on that, and when I looked at the report, the previous report, it said well, we can rebuild this for 60, build it in Keene for 62, and then all of a sudden your report came out in June and said it's 30. And I didn't know, well, what happened to the other $30 million in cost for building? I can't imagine building costs of
Beats me. Well, it's a different. You're not building a big institutional facility. I mean, I can't comment on the validity of those 60 million. I had nothing to do with that. That's what they said it was going to cost, and that was 5 years ago. Presumably, costs have gone up. I don't know, but those numbers look pretty high to me. But the 30 it was 28. Dugan got those numbers talking to some of the local people that he works with to try to get estimates and the square footage and all that kind of thing.
You mean the newer numbers?
Yeah, the newer numbers, and also compared it to essentially the actual cost in some of the other similar greenhouses. There was one, for example, out in New York, that the one that actually is in that video near Rochester, and they're very similar. Almost the same configuration. They're 10-person houses, and it was I think about $2 million. A little under $2 million per house. They're 68 square foot or something. I'm not good at that kind of stuff, but I take those, the estimates that they've got as valid, and they did compare to the cost of similar structures elsewhere.
Certainly, the buildings like the conventional nursing homes or hospital are steel construction and brick buildings, whereas each of the greenhouse cottages is a wooden frame structure, which is far less expensive to build than a 3, 4, or 5-story institution or brick building.
The other piece too that we've talked about and have looked at is the fact that we lots of times will look at one another when we visit places and say, "Would you want to live here? Do you like it?" And I remember we visited one county facility that was touting that it was greenhouse-like. And we went to visit that. John walked out of the bedroom and said, "I wouldn't want to live here the rest of my life. Look at how little this room is." And it was tiny. And what they did was it was silly. They had a kitchen in the center of the space, but they didn't cook there, because the director of dining services said, "Oh, it'd never work." And so they were still doing the traditional tray line from the main kitchen and sending the food up. I mean, some people have been inspired by the greenhouse, but then they don't carry the whole concept forward. And that's what we saw when we visited that. It was just a phenomenal waste of space that could have been given back to the residents with larger rooms, which would have been more comfortable. And all of the rooms that we've visited at the sites, people can bring their own furniture if they want their own furniture. They have their own televisions if they want. There's television in the main room. I mean, it's like being home. It's absolutely like being home. And that's the other thing that comes up so many times is, "Oh, I'm not going to need this. I'm going to stay home until I die." And, we all would like to think that, but there are things that can happen which are going to preclude that, that ability for us. And so I think that if nothing from other than, wanting to know that we're building something that's going to really do the best we can do for our residents in the county. And I just think it's really paramount that we take this opportunity. And I've said this, John's going to hate me saying it again, but early in this process, when I was on the task force, the first time I visited one of them, I said, "We're going to do this." I said, "This is really important. We're going to be the first in the state of New Hampshire," and that's what I keep advocating, because I really am very committed to this. It's a wonderful, wonderful opportunity that we have here.
Actually, when I talked to Jean Shaheen about it during the summer, she said, "Well, if you can get this done, it'd be a great model for the rest of the state." A comment about the furniture thing, which seems like just a little detail, but 2 points. One, I was talking to somebody that had visited one of these places out in the Midwest and was talking to some of the, I can't remember who it was talking to the residents and asked somebody, what did they like the most? what was the most significant thing about it, and I guess somebody had been in previous in an institutional facility, she said, I got my own bed. She said, that means a lot to me. And I've heard from people that know the subject, and I certainly don't, that particularly for dementia patients, I shouldn't say patients, but people with dementia, having familiar things like a bed or you know, a bureau, stuff like that, is comforting as opposed to being stuck in a hospital bed or in an institutional-like setting. Just another one of those sort of psychological things. So much of this has to do with the personal, I guess, psychology or the feeling of independence and integrity of the individual. The great story about how this whole thing started, which you probably heard, Dr. Bill Thomas, who's the founder of this thing, fresh out of Harvard Medical School, and he was a geriatrician. He went to visit somebody, you know, in a nursing home, and she had whatever she had, and he said, you know, how you doing? And she looked up at him and said, Doctor, I'm so lonely. And that was the germ that started the whole thing, that was the issue, not bed sores or something. Loneliness, helplessness, and boredom were the three horrors of nursing home life. And he thought there had to be a better way, and that's when he started putting together this whole concept that is now really taken off around the country.
I imagine you've been hearing a lot about the impact on tax rates coming out of all this, and so how are you responding to those concerns?
Well, the tax rates, unfortunately, some of this has to be borne by the taxpayers. It used to be, up until about, I think, starting about 10 years ago, that Medicaid paid for 100%. Actually, they were running in the black. It got cut to 50%. And to carry out the mission, they needed to have support from the county taxpayers, and it was running, I think the last numbers I had, a deficit of about 2.7 million. We had, when we did the financial feasibility study, we had to see if that was going to be comparable, and it is. I mean, there still is a tax burden, but unless the county was going to get out of the business and sell it off to a private operator, the county would still have the obligation to pay for county residents or county people for their care, even if they're in a private place. I mean, that's state law. The problem with that, and this is the argument I've had with this one individual who says, oh, well, the government can't do it, you ought to turn it over to a private operator, is because the county's on the hook for providing the payment, they'd have no control over the costs. And the private operators obviously are not going to run a deficit, so they're going to sort of do the numbers so that they get covered, and the county would still be on the hook for it and not be able either to control the care, the kind of care that's being provided, or the costs.
When the hospital has patients who require nursing home placement, the private nursing homes will screen exceedingly carefully for the patients who they consider accepting. They will send their own staff out to be interviewing the patient and the family, to be reviewing the records, to be reviewing the patient's medication program and the like. And what they strive for are the people who are cognitively intact, who don't require too much care, who are not incontinent, and who do not have behavioral issues. That is a minority. Whereas Maplewood takes virtually everyone when they have a bed, which is in fact most of the time. So it's really cherry picking by the for-profit nursing homes. And the discharge planners at the hospital do an amazing job. When someone's admitted to the hospital, the discharge planners within 24 hours have done an assessment of potential post-hospitalization needs, and it's done very well.
John, in order for this to cost taxpayers $18 million instead of $28 million, that relies on it falling in this particular district, which it does. And then there's the funding mechanism. And as I understand it from your meeting, which isn't particularly well, because it's, as a lot of Jack's financial maneuverings for these kinds of things, it's really, you have to be an expert, I think, in how that stuff all works. But it would involve selling $10 million in tax credits. Is that something that's guaranteed to happen? I mean, it's not like you get out there in the market and there's no buyers for this. That can't happen, right?
No, well, you know the way it works, and you know Jack, and we started talking about this months ago when he started talking to the people that he works with to get, the potential buyers of the tax credits. There were several already lined up, and so he has the confidence, and I have enough confidence that it's there and it works. And and the $18 million, I mean, that comes after 7 years anyhow. The way the thing starts is if his thing gets built, they lease it to the county. The county pays lease payments for the first 7 years that are only interest and taxes. And that would be roughly $800,000 or something like that, the taxes on the property, because it does pay city property tax for 7 years.
Right.
And then at the end of that, presumably the county buys it, then it bonds the $18 million to pay off the $18 million bank loan, because there's a piece of that that's bank loan that's interest only for 7 years.
But that's MEDC is on
MEDC,
the hook for that.
That's right.
So what happens in 7 years if the economy is further down than it is right now, and the taxpayers of the county say, we can't do this, we can't pony up $18 million to buy this facility? Then does MEDC just now continue to own a...
Well, at that point, the county would be operating a nursing home at that point.
Right.
The question is, will they continue to operate the nursing home? They could continue to lease it.
Because we've had a discussion of looking at partnerships with some for-profits. Because, for example, at Bentley Commons, that's independent and assisted. They don't have a nursing level. So I've spoken with Jack about the potential of perhaps looking at a partnership with a Bentley Commons to have them have 1, 2, 3 nursing care level greenhouse cottages available. So there's ways that I think we're trying to be as creative as we can in terms of what the potentials are that are out there. And yesterday at a meeting we had, Jack was going through all the numbers and everything, and finally I said, Jack, would it be too much if I were to ask you to just put this in real simple terms and do sort of a line time kind of thing, so that I'm sure I've got it completely? I mean, I'm learning it as we do it, but it's hard to wrap your head around this whole process where we get this money and we're able to move forward for less money than if we weren't having this relationship. So it's challenging.
Yeah, I would say, Bill, your hypothetical sort of poses where they are now. I mean, essentially, they're operating, they're providing a long-term care service. It costs a certain amount of money to do that from the taxpayers. Do they continue to do that? It's the same question now. Whether they sell it out now, that they'd have in 7 years if the economy went down. Would they get out of the business or not?
Well, that operationally it's the same.
Yeah.
You're in the same situation 7 years from now.
Yeah.
But in terms of risk and who has assumed that risk, if MEDC or some subgroup of that is going to buy this land, put up these buildings at a cost of $28 million, they're then going to sell tax credits for $10 million of it, so they've recouped that over the 7 years.
Right.
Now they've still got $18 million sunk into this that the county ostensibly is going to repay by buying the facility at that point. And I guess I'm just wondering, what is MEDC just on the hook to eat $18 million if the county 7 years from now, if voters say no, we're not going to approve this? It's in terms of risk, who is going to be taking that risk, and or how much of a risk is it even?
Well, there's another risk. There's another risk that's out there too that we haven't even begun to talk about, and that risk is that if we keep Maplewood as it is and continue to operate it as it is, we are in violation of any number of federal regulations in that facility. We've been grandfathered. But the reality is there's no AC in that facility during the summertime, and we exceed temperatures which were supposed to be in compliance with federal government. So what's going to happen sooner or later is the push is going to happen. And once we start having to comply with one regulation where we're out of compliance, something as simple as how low the windows are in the nursing home, we're in violation of the federal regulation. The windows are too low. They should be higher so that people can't fall out of the windows. I mean, just think about the amount of money as this thing snowballs. So either way, I think we're going to be looking, whether we do a greenhouse concept or if we stay at Maplewood, there's going to be some money that's going to have to be spent by, and the taxpayers in the county are going to have to accept that, as long as we're going to stay in the business. Or as, you know, John described, I mean, we had long conversations with lots of people, doctors. We had people come in for the for-profit nursing homes to talk about what we're doing and what we're thinking. And you know, I just think, do you take care of elderly people or don't you? Yeah, taxpayers may not like it. They didn't like building the jail either, did they?
Where it is, in the, you know, on the segue to where do things stand right now? The context, the political context right now is the new delegation has their organizational meeting. I think next Monday they elect their people. Nobody has decided anything yet at the formally at the commissioner or delegation level. What we're recommending is that they authorize that the delegation sort of bless continuing to do the study and come in with a plan by fairly early on, because you know this isn't starting from scratch. You could even by mid-February, something like that, present a plan, detail. You know, here it is. Here's what it's going to cost. Does this make sense? They wouldn't even have to commit to the lease at that time, but they could just give a blessing to go ahead with the actual development. The optimistic time frame, from my perspective, is that this could be done with, you know, the construction wouldn't, we talked to contracts about, construction wouldn't take that long. You're building these individual houses, and they can put them up pretty fast. So we would thinking, hopefully, ideally, the optimistic view is we could have them done by the end of next year. And at that point, it would be leased to the county. So essentially, they'd have the blessing to go ahead and develop it, but they wouldn't have to commit any money yet. So, you know, technically, it wouldn't have an effect on the current budget that they'll be considering for 2015. It's just basically they have to decide, does this make sense? And honestly, it just seemed to me a no-brainer. I mean, compared to what the choices seem to be so obvious that one hopes that people will see it that way. And you know, I've done talking all over the community about this. Everybody loves the greenhouse idea, even those who are skeptical for one reason or another thinks this makes so much more sense for people. And you know, that's the mission that they want to carry on. So if they want to carry it on, this is the best way to do it.
So one new thing was the discussions going on on the veterans front.
Yeah.
So just to understand that a little more fully, would that involve in effect the Veterans Administration or some federal entity buying the facility from the county?
Oh yeah. I would think so.
Yeah.
And you know, that's really getting wildly hypothetical to think what they'd buy it for. But you know, if they didn't, you know, they don't want to be stuck with a building that's out there and they aren't doing anything with and trying to maintain it. It would be a very desirable thing to have somebody just take it over.
And it also would be a huge boon to health care for the veterans within the state. It would be a great supplement to the White River Junction VA Hospital and Cheshire Medical Center as well. There would be no competition between the two. It would be lots of jobs and positions and a major big league construction project as well.
And one question that has come up is, well, if the VA can rehab this place, why aren't you doing it? And what my response to that is, the rehabbing of the building for VA is a hospital model. It's a rehab. It is not a home in which I live until I pass. And I think that that's one thing that, you know, we need to continue to clarify, is that we're really talking about a cultural change. We're not looking at long-term care, nursing home care in a hospital setting. We want it to be a home-like setting. And as you said the other day, you know, the veterans, how many times have they shared bathrooms? You know, and you know, but I think that is something that we need to clarify for people.
You mentioned the property near the jail site as a potential location, and you said you used the term "we" as like an all-encompassing "we." Who's been doing the negotiating, and who owns the land now?
The land now is, I can't remember the name of the owner now, but the contract, I have a copy of it in my bag. The contract is with a subsidiary of MEDC, has the contract to buy it, and that's the entity that would be, you know, would be doing the development, and it would buy it, it would do the contracting for the construction, everything else, and it would be the owner leasing it to the county.
Okay. So
and I'm trying to remember, I don't remember the name of the entity. It doesn't mean anything.
Okay.
Monadnock Development, I can't remember what it is. It's Monadnock Development Corporation or something like that. It's some subsidiary of MEDC.
Okay.
And the way that has to be done is that in order to get the tax credits, it has to be a private, it can't be a nonprofit, it has to be a tax-paying entity in order to get the tax credits.
Okay. And who on behalf of the county has been negotiating?
They haven't been negotiating it at all.
Okay.
Yeah. They know about it, and they know that we're doing it, but it has to be a private entity that does that, does the acquisition, and hence was doing the negotiation.
So how did you determine that this was a possible site for it then? Someone had to be talking to someone else. Like, who was doing the talking?
Well, essentially MEDC.
With members of the task force?
Oh yeah, with me. Yeah, no, I've been working with ME. Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
yeah, oh yeah. Yeah, Dugan's we've had sort of a little steering committee of this group that's been trying to carry the project forward, and Dugan is part of that. I think actually there's a list of some of the other, the three of us, and somebody named Jim Rumanier is in that group, and Barbara Duckett, who's in Florida right now, Yvonne Goldsberry,
Lisa.
Yeah, Lisa, and Mike Forrest.
Chuck Weed was.
Well, no, he's just been
Yeah.
observing.
Right.
Yeah.
And Chris Coates has been.
Yeah, Chris Coates. I forgot Chris. Yeah.
Okay. So your group is just proposing this as a potential location.
Oh yeah.
Okay. And why did you believe that this was an attractive place or a suitable place for?
First of all, there's a lot of room because it's 85 acres. It's not in the floodplain. It's not in the toxic waste site. If you go up on the property, and I've walked all over, you go up there and there's views out to the hills. It's a pretty site. It's got city water, city sewer. You could scatter these houses around there, and it just seems absolutely perfect for it. And critically, it's right at the edge, at the far edge of the Newmarket tax credit zone. I think it goes right up to the edge, and it's accessible. You know, it's on 101. If you go drive out there, you can see there just before you get to where the jail is, going out on 101. There's a driveway that goes up. There's a sign there that says "For Sale." It's been sale for 10 years or something, but it says "For Sale, 85 acres." That's the property that. I'm sorry about the pronouns. The we. Me, I have nothing. You know,
I'm sure you feel a sense of ownership.
Yeah. Well, I have I have a moral ownership of some kind.
Have you gotten any pushback from people with the fact that it's right next to the jail, and some people might be saying
nobody knows where it is, but nobody has known. As you know, everybody's been wondering where it is and been asking, and we've been very coy about that because while you were negotiating the very, I would say it's a favorable. Let me just say, all I'll say is it's a favorable price, acquisition price, and that was not going to stay very favorable the more it was talked about publicly. So we've got that option for 6 months. 6 months, and that obviously means that it's a clock that has some significance financially.
How would the nursing home and the jail ever coexist anyway?
Yeah.
It did in Westmoreland for decades.
I mean, when I found out what where the land was, that was the first thing I thought. You know, the county farm, the jail, the nursing home, it was all there. We're going back to what started 200 years ago. Yeah.
So that's next. You're going to move to the county farm next to it.
Can we bring the river?
That's interesting.
Well, thank you for your time.
Well, thank you for your
Thank you very
time.
much for
Really
coming in.
appreciate the opportunity to come talk to you.